This is awesome. We've been off to a great conversation. We just recorded a community topics episode on the influences of music on humanity, which was a great episode, actually. We weren't sure where it was going to go, but it ended up yielding a lot of insights, which led to a further discussion just before we started recording here about, I guess, what it is that's so unique and beautiful about dualistic unity when it comes to looking at our collective habit of reinforcing our egotistical habit, which reinforces our egotistical habit, which reinforces our egotistical habit to the point where the world that we live in is just this collective whirlpool of habitual egotism that sucks everything back into itself. And so whenever somebody wakes up or they start to, that whirlpool of the pool of egotism turns them into a fucking guru, or it disillusions them and they let go of it entirely. And so for someone to wake up, to see it, to not get pulled into the flow, or when they do, not lose themselves in doing so, is rare and beautiful and unique. And when more of us start to do that, when more people start to do that, it is even more rare. And so dualistic unity, the community that's growing, is incredible. It's something that I've waited half my life to witness, and I would have been happy waiting the entirety of my life to witness, because it's a seed that can grow an incredible tree in the middle of that whirlpool.
Yeah, I've been getting some like crazy just imagery and insights about that, like that sort of infiltration of the ego from within, like of the perception of division from within, and recognizing that, like, you make more or less progress based on how invested in one end of the spectrum is. And the reason that it's so difficult to do is because progress from the egotistical mentality looks significantly different than progress from the recognition of unity perspective, from the letting go of your idea of yourself. So every time someone has tried to start something, like, they see progress from the egotistical perspective, and so it runs toward egotism. Like, the progress of dualistic unity cannot be measured by any egotistical metric. Like, it can't. Oh, fuck. And that's what makes it so fucking tough. Like, we can't invest overt amounts of energy in measuring ourselves based on all the things that everyone else does, like listens, shares, money made, all of that stuff like that. And as that ever becomes the focus, because I'll admit I get pulled into shit like that all the time, like it slows the progress from the perspective of what's being done. And so, holy fuck, it's like going directly against the grain, essentially, like the grain of what reality is overtly invested in and is way too invested in right now, like across the board, being identity. It's like right in the face of it. Oh, geez.
Because it's important that that happens, because we see where this is going. That's the point. We're all kind of stuck in the undertow. We don't understand how to get out of it. We don't understand, how you swim kind of around it, right? Like, that's the point. And so we're very much stuck in it. And then what's worse is that we've convinced ourselves this is all there is, and that, don't worry, we haven't died yet. We're not going to get sucked under. It's like, we're being sucked under. This is what's happening. We're getting sucked under. We're literally suffocating with our self-absorption. This is the mental health pandemic that's happening right now, right? Is that we can't get out of the mentality that's causing all of our suffering. And then all of our solutions come from that mentality, which causes more suffering. It's obvious when you look at it, when you look at the rising cost of housing, the number of houses that are empty, and yet the rising number of homeless people. right? When you look at these things and you recognize it for what it is, you go, wow, that's kind of a weird contradiction. And the only reason for it is the fact that, no, we got to make a certain amount of money because we got the economy. The economy's got to keep going. And this is the same reason that in the Great Depression, they were burying food. They were burying food while people starved, so that way they could keep prices up. This is how stupid we are as a collective. This is how stupid our organizations are as a collective, because they only know how to protect themselves. That's the problem. We need awareness of these things, right? We need to be able to go, hold up, are we burying food? Like, that has to be a legitimate conversation, right? And it can't just be, well, you know, jobs and economy and all that other stuff. It's like there are other priorities, and that's the problem, is we've kind of lost our ability to prioritize in all of this because we're caught in the undertow. Our only priority is just to keep paddling, right? And it's becoming kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. You know, like, we're just like, progress. It's like, to what? Where are you going? Exactly what is happening here? Because it seems like things are getting worse.
Sorry, I realized I had my sign that I put up on my live on a free live Zoom call. I had it flipped backwards, but that's it. Like, it's interesting when you see things and behavior from like a collective perspective, as opposed to thinking about individuals and seeing like the push and pull of investing in a given mentality versus another, and investing in that perception of division just reinforces itself. And so it's like every aspect of everything we do is distorted, and it's like reinforcing the baseline of what we think we are. And so like all of our behavior begins to play out in that way, and it goes so unquestioned. Like, I've had conversations with relatively rational, logical people about population, and they're pretty big into capitalism and all that stuff, and like, you know, economy's got to keep going, and they just won't hear it. Like, yeah, but what if we're going towards like 80 billion people on Earth? Like, what's going to happen then? And they just think like, oh, we'll get to a spot where it gets noticeable enough, and then we'll change, and then we'll shift. Like, that's right now. You just don't want to take responsibility for that. Like, that's such an obvious one. Like, you take that expansion, you can look at the last 30 years, how much the population's grown. And then you look at the Earth, it's a limited spot, but then you just got fuckers saying, oh, we'll just go to Mars and let's make more people to get us to Mars. It's like, oh man, we just want to keep, we want to do everything but look at ourselves. We want to do everything but that. And that's the process of the collective mentality not being willing to look. So it's got to be everything else. It's got like,
It's interesting. It's funny because we'll talk about this. We'll talk about, you know, the collective mentality. We'll talk about the system. And I know somebody on the political left will listen to that and go, yeah, you know, it's the Republicans, it's the right. And then somebody on the right will go, yeah, you know, it's the people on the left. And the point is that it's that very mentality. That's it. It's that mentality, that our ideologies, how we identify, really is a legitimate division. Actually exists somewhere outside of our consciousness, of our decision to conceptualize it as a division. And it doesn't. That's the whole point. This is what we're always getting at, is like, none of that's true, right? But the mentality that you're committed to is how you act. It's what you act according to. And so it's not about who's wrong or who's right. It's about, fuck, what am I attached to in terms of my mindset, in terms of how I perceive things? What am I attached to? What am I doing here? Exactly what ripples am I creating? But we just want to point the finger. That's always what we want to do. And it's funny because people will look at some of the comments that I say on Instagram, and I'm not always friendly, admittedly. And what I mean by that is not that I'm deliberately like, you're a dumb fuck. Like, I'm never going to do that. But depending on the intensity and the intention behind the conversation, I might just fuck with that person for a bit, just for the sake of it. If they say something stupid, I might just go, that was a little bit foolish, just because, it is. And as much as you don't have to judge yourself for that, that's okay. And people will ask me, like, don't you think that that's not helping? Do you think that maybe that's getting in the way of the message of the podcast? To which my response is no, because that is the message of the podcast. Follow your intuition. Respond accordingly. When I react to someone, when I respond to someone, when I comment to someone, the comment that I'm leaving, the response that I'm giving is very much coming from a place of, okay, what's going to have the most impact here? Not in this moment, but overall. Because it's not necessarily about getting through to someone right now, but leaving them something that might stick later on and jostle something else that happens and become a chain reaction. And so there's more to it than just the response you're getting right now. I'm not looking at it in that way. And so it's difficult to go, well, that's not very unifying, because everything is unifying if it's coming from a certain intention. Everything is in fact unified. So there's nothing to unify whatsoever, but there is a unity to embody. And that is just being your authentic self. And that is always going to change according to who you talk to. This idea of that there's a certain way to be unified is what's actually killing the groove for you. It's what's ruining it and distorting it. It's this should. You already are unity.
Yeah, it's like the reality of what you are is so expansive. So your perspective when you're in a situation, the more expanded you get towards it, like not being so concerned with like the immediate reaction, but it'll give you more perspective, and then you can make a more well-informed response. So it's like that combo of the willingness to have that expanded point of view. So you both have patience with it. You don't feel a need to rush it. It's like just tiny little pokes, tiny little nudges, just like a tiny bit of a degree, as opposed to wanting to like smack them and send them. But also there's no concern of how they're perceiving it as well. And so it's that balance, because you're willing to play that role of being seen in whichever way. So it's like, it's both the willingness to set them off and the willingness to not say something so drastic, and not even like in an offensive way, but just like little tiny nudges. Hey, have you maybe considered this? And as you have that perspective, there's so much more. It's like the things you consider are relative to how expanded that point of view is. And so you're just considering so much more. So it's not to say that you're saying, the perfect thing or the one correct thing to say, but you have a broader perspective of reality. And so you're able to make a much more well-informed decision to how to respond, which is just there. I'm making it sound like it's this entire process of like figuring out a response, but it's like what happens now, because there isn't any process, and it comes to you quicker when you let go of the idea that there is.
Because you're allowing more context. We always say this about intelligence, right? Like the more context you give your intelligence, the more your intelligence has to work with. And so when you're processing something, the more you're aware of, the egotistical spectrum, for example, the more you're aware of the fallout or the cascade of shit that happens with one assumption or one judgment or any of that, the more it changes how you respond to people coming from that mentality. Right. So, for example, we had the call-in edition of Raw this week. I think it was episode 66. And Joshua had called in, and he had a serious point to make in terms of wanting to show us to be spiritual gurus who are trying to take advantage of people. There were a lot of assumptions that he brought to the table. And he wanted to come onto the episode to prove that. He really did. He said it for days on Instagram. And then he came on, he said his bit, and then he had to take credit for us saying in the episode that you shouldn't follow us, despite the fact that we've always said that. And then, he went on his way. And you see, what's funny is that all of that came from him commenting over and over and over again on Instagram, basically just, being aggressive. And Andrew finally saying to me on Sunday, there's this guy that just kind of keeps hounding us on Instagram, because I hadn't noticed. And so I went and I'm like, okay, well, we'll address it. And so I did. I met him with the same, I would guess, intuitive response that we're talking about here, in terms of what his intention was, where he was coming from, and I responded accordingly. And he's like, "Oh, I got to prove myself." But the point is that he left us alone, and it brought him to a point where he just had to either put up or shut up. So now he's committed. Now he is invested in this. And normally it's at this point, people will just not show up. And that's often the case. But he really was committed. Now you see how much energy and investment is going into this stance that he's taking. So now he comes onto the episode, and he leaves the episode, and he does not feel like he has performed very well. But he tells himself he has, and that, in fact, the conversation dried up as soon as Joshua left. That's very much what he was saying in the private messages after the fact. And so he couldn't let it go. He had to keep messaging me. And then he had to leave a comment on his YouTube video. And then he had to create a fake account to agree with his original comment on the YouTube video. And then he continued to message me after the fact. Finally, the last message I got from him was that I was a pathetic excuse for a teacher, and that my followers are going to be very confused, which is hilarious, because if you're a follower in any way, you should stop listening right now. And I've said that since the beginning. Like, the whole thing was just funny, but he can't let it go. Why am I willing to let all of that happen? Because all of that invested energy leads to a fall. And in that fall, there is the capacity for an insight. And I know it because I've done it. I know it because I've done it so many times. I understand what comes from that overcommitment. I understand what comes from overextending yourself for a certain goal, and then it not turning out. It hits, and there is a potential moment that you can learn from if you're willing to take it and deal with how shitty it feels to be acting like a fool from time to time. But that's how you learn. Nobody's going to learn if we're just making excuses for them. Nobody's going to learn if we're always playing the nice guy, the enlightened person, the unifying person. That's not helping anything. It's a pleasant image. It's a pleasant image of what unity in God is. It's very much like God is love. God is also your skinned knee. It's important to keep that in mind, because you learn from that skinned knee. It's not always what you'd prefer.
Well said. Yeah, it's about, because with this recognition and like the investment in our collective mentality right now, like it needs a shaking, like enough so there's the opportunity for a shift and change. And oftentimes that comes with the fall. It's like the volatility and the depths of that is so high, and then it's kind of on them and the responsibility they take that gives them the opportunity to like let go of something or reattach to something and reinforce that thing. And so it's giving people the opportunity, but as we remain comfortable, and like the religion politics conversation, like that allows us to not be as shaken. Like we desire that subdued sort of comfort. So like, don't talk politics and religion in mixed company. Like that maintains that baseline hum. There isn't the volatility there. And through that, although a lot of people are very firm in their stance, not everyone is all the time. But as we avoid those types of conversations, people just maintain it despite like a little nudge, like, hey, have you ever thought about it like this? Just in that sort of conversation, because we'll say things like that and it'll get flagged, raised video, like hate speech. And it's just the subtlest thing, like, hey, have you ever thought your idea of God isn't the reality of God? Like that's all. And someone will be like, that's disrespectful. How dare you question that? Like that's that's the degree to which you have to go to set someone off. And that's not even any sort of argument. So it's just anything that may shake someone, and the things we hold on to the tightest, be it identity, which comes in political and religious form, as we hold on to those getting questioned shakes the roots of the tree. Like if the trunk of the tree is shaking, those branches are shaking a lot. If the branches are shaking, it doesn't mean that the root's always going to be shaken. And so those depths of the things that we attach to, the reason when you question, especially religion, it gets such a visceral reaction because you're getting closer to that trunk. It's shaking that foundation. And so it makes sense why, as a societal collective ego, like we've dismissed those as even things we can fucking talk about. That's insane, but it also makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I always find it funny when Christians especially are like, act with love, you're supposed to be forgiving. And it's like, Jesus like whipped people like in a temple. Just wanted to mention that. Obviously there was something there that he thought was important. And the point was just that like, this isn't the place for that. Like there's a time and fucking place for everything. This is not the place for that. And that was pretty much his point. And that's kind of it. Like it would be like if somebody came into the Dualistic Unity community, for example, and was trying to peddle some kind of a practice or some kind of a belief that's going to get you to enlightenment, whatever it might be, or shortcut you to the level of awareness. Most of the community, almost all of the community, especially the ones who've been there for a while, would go, hold up, what are you doing exactly? And there would be very much a collective, I don't know if you're aware of where you are right now. Right. And that would be very, very much the point. We wouldn't be whipping people because, I'd like to say that we learned from good old JC back in the day, but it would be very much a light lashing of the ego, let's just say. Right. And so it's important to recognize that you're not always meant to be stroking someone's ego. It's not always about them feeling good, especially if them feeling good is stopping them from learning. Now, that all said, we have a question in the comment section, and it's a good question. So I wanted to bring it up quickly. Hey there, I've been listening to the podcast and wanted to get your help navigating between the ideas of 1, distancing from the self, and 2, understanding that everyone is you and you are everyone, with the idea of I'm God, I'm everyone, and everyone is me, and I made this reality. How do you distance from the self while also believing I'm everything that is? Thanks. This is a great question. I want to say very quickly, welcome. I'm glad you're listening to the podcast. That's great. And I'm very happy that you're here joining us because this is the best way to communicate with us. In all honesty, is live or on a group Zoom, which we do 5 days a week on Patreon and for free on every Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern time. Throw that in very quickly. I think it really just comes down to focus on number 1. Just focus on number 1. Don't worry about the we're all one thing. Don't worry about the, I'm God and all that. Just let go of your idea of yourself, because what you'll end up with is the reality that all you know is you. And now, right now, that might be okay. And then you're going to try and form an idea of that, which is not it. So it's about deepening the experience of the gap between recognizing that you're not what you think before your brain creates something else to think of that. Okay. There's a gap there. And in that gap, in that silence, in that space, you start to recognize that there's a reality to what is that is not conceptual at all. And in that, recognizing that you're not what you think, so therefore nothing that you think is what is. None of the division that you conceive, none of the division that you perceive or experience is what you think it is. And therefore there is no division. And that's where the recognition of unity comes in. It's not about the belief. It's not about, holding on to it, telling yourself that, let all that shit go. This is the hardest part about having this conversation, is it's hard not to be misleading to some degree, even when you're trying not to. And so I would say, focus on number 1, right? Number 1 leads to number 2 when carried far enough, right? And through that process, if you want to check in and chat with us from time to time, because it's a hell of a process, right? Then that'd be great. We'd love to be a part of that for you. Or you can join us on Discord or Patreon or anything like that. There's a hell of a community on Discord. They're all having the same conversation and going through very much a lot of these questions. And so I appreciate you being here. I'll pass it over to Andrew now.
Yeah, that was very well said. I honestly don't have much to add on, but maybe just some to reiterate like that. It's interesting how people will come at it from that perspective, like the belief that I am everything, and try and go in that way or do both at the same time. And it really isn't even that, because it's, and we can get this perspective like, okay, I'm either letting go of myself or recognizing that I'm everything. And we see it kind of like as a 50-50 thing, like, oh, you can go at it this way or you can go at it that way. And like this way, like believing that you're everything isn't even it, because immediately there's a division, like there's a reinforcing of a division. I believe in everything. I see that I am everything. And until, if you have any degree of your idea maintained, it's 0% that. Because if you're saying I am everything, there's still the idea being everything. So it has to be a letting go of the idea, and then the recognition makes sense. Because if there's even a twinge of the idea of yourself recognizing that you're everything, that's not it. Like that's a conceptual idea, and it's reinforcing your idea of yourself. And so it has to come from that. Like definitely don't believe that you're everything at all. Like it really does become clear when the division comes down, either from the perspective that, your idea of yourself that is maintained and you conceptually see as, this ending at your skin, as that is dropped, or the expansion of the idea, recognizing, as Ray said, that you're the only thing you know. And right now it's just this, but as that expands, as you see that your entire experience is you, it's like it expands out from the wall. So it can be those perspectives, absolutely, those recognitions, but the belief, how do I deal with the getting to understanding that everything is unity? Like don't try to do that until you've questioned everything you believe to be true about what you think you are.
Yeah, because immediately you're going to try and create some idea of what unity is. Even trying to be everything is, you're just like, what is that? And your brain's just trying to feed on it. Just like, here's more of everything. And that's never it, right? No matter what you come up with, that's not it. And that's why it's not about going in that direction, right? This is very much the same mistake we make in terms of concepts and knowledge. We're trying to get to intelligence. Instead, we're burdening ourselves with little bits and pieces of fragments of information rather than actually being intelligence. This is why I love the whole, narrow path, wide path traveled by many, right? Like narrow path traveled by few. It is this willingness to just let go of certainty. It's not about trying to figure out everything. It's about understanding you are everything you know, right? That's the path. That's the way, the truth, and the life, as it were. And that's why everybody's, well, Jesus said it's I am that. Jesus said I. That's the whole thing. It's just, if you don't understand the conversation, you're not getting it, right? Because you're coming up with an idea of yourself. You can't help but come up with an idea of yourself. But if you take that as truth, that's the problem, right? The I that he's talking about is not the I that you can conceive, right? The self that you are is not the idea of the self. That's the thing. Like, people get lost in this. They're like, oh, I got to let go of the self. It's like, you cannot let go of what you are. It's what you think you are that isn't what you are. That's what you can let go of. What remains is you, and you can call it whatever the hell you want. It's still the fact that you remain. Whatever you are remains. That's the reality. And it's limitless in its depth. But how often do we just allow ourselves to sit in its depth without conceptualizing it and running from the discomfort of not knowing?
That at its depths is the expression of intelligence. Like, that's always being the case. So it really is, we're either thinking that we're adding intelligence to ourself, or we're more clearly recognizing that we are intelligence. Like, any degree of trying to add intelligence, you cannot simultaneously recognize that you are intelligence. And the more you recognize that you are intelligence, the thought of adding intelligence is silly. But as soon as the recognition of being intelligence means something about a limited idea, it becomes like the gaining of intelligence, like it becomes distorted, because it can't be, the idea of yourself can't be maintained as you recognize the intelligence. And if it does mean anything about the idea, it's taking away from that recognition. And it's just the illusion that you could possibly add intelligence. So it's whether it comes in the form of fearing losing intelligence, thinking something means something about you. And it's reflective very similarly to our value, like recognizing that you have value, you can gain value, or recognizing that you are value, which is just what is. Like, it's not a high or a low value. Like, value is a thing that exists on a spectrum, and you need high or low. If you just say that has value, it's just that is of value. It's like saying, oh, that's interesting, worthy of interest. There is a massive spectrum that word exists upon. And it's just, and but it's even like our perception causes it to fall on a side of that spectrum, and it needs the perception in order to do so. As it comes out of someone's mouth, it's like, that's interesting. It is right down the line. Obviously, there's tones you can use, but still, even with those tones, they're taken in by you, and you're perceiving it falling on a degree of the spectrum. But that it needs you in order to fall on a side of the spectrum. And that is the dualistic experience. Holy fuck. Like, all of those intelligence, being intelligence versus measuring value versus high-low value, interest, like, they're all fucking down the fucking middle. And then it needs the dual perspective in order to become something like, oh, fuck.
Which we feed without even realizing it, right? It's what I'm always saying in Discover Transcendence. Anybody who's watching this, if you would like a breakdown of what we're saying from, the foundation, check out Discover Transcendence on YouTube. It's like 48 minutes long. But basically, we have this mind that is capable of perceiving things positively or negatively. We can go one way or the other, right? And we don't understand that can lead to another one, can lead to another one, can lead to another one. And so we have this incredibly powerful tool like a chainsaw, and we wield it everywhere. And we don't understand that we can create insane amounts of damage doing so, mostly to ourselves and others as a result of doing that to ourselves. Right. And it's just that we don't really have a healthy respect for exactly how powerful our perceptions are. Right. This is why it's important to build the skill of letting them go in terms of them being the truth. Because if you don't, you'll find yourself defending them. And then you'll defend the defense of the defense. And then you'll defend the defense of the defense of defense. And you'll just end up in this vicious fucking cycle where you're totally defending a standpoint that you forgot why you attached to begin with. And people will spend years doing that shit. Right, to the point where it just becomes, it's just who I am. No, it's not, but you've attached to it, so that's what you're acting out, right? And that's what people do all the time, because we don't want to go back to that blank slate. But that blank slate is freedom, and all it is just letting go of your attachment to all the growing perceptions that you've attached to over time, right? Because they accumulate, and so layer by layer, you let them go, and you get closer and closer to being that exposed nerve that is the experience of being in reality, as opposed to being in your head, right? And while it is intense, it is also very fluid and intuitive, and it is where intelligence lies. And it's just a practice. It's just a practice. But this goes to a question that I wanted to address because it's important. Why does it seem that more and more people are trying to create division now instead of unity? It's getting worse. I don't think it is getting worse. I think that you're seeing it as worse because there's more people, but frankly, I think it's the same problem that we've been wrestling with for a very long time, which is identity as truth. As long as we are committed to identity itself, identity is going to continue to manifest as a priority and divide us. And so all we're doing is seeing the same old habit that we've been maintaining for a long time, rampant in a population of 8 billion people.
Yeah, and I think just by its nature, it's like the intensity of it grows because it's stuck on more, like on growth, on egotistical expansion. As it does that, the more extreme you get into that, the more intense it's going to be. So like that process of continuing to invest in it, it's like it's a self-destructive process. And so as that process gets played out and there's more people, like it's going to get more and more closer to the self-destructive nature. Like it's inevitable that that's sort of where it comes to, because there's just so many things, so many products of it. Like all of the, not all, but like, who knows, to a degree over an extended period of time, all of the illness, all of the things are extensions of that. And so whether it's, us bombing ourselves, us polluting the shit out of the world, like us just having so much disease come up that we die, like there is an inevitable end to that, whether it comes from within or perceived as without. It's like one cohesive unit fighting with itself. Inevitably, there's not going to be a whole lot left as it continues to do that. And so I think that's the intensity you notice is that, but it's been the progression of the same stream. It's like the same river, and it's just getting more and more deeply invested, like almost closer and closer to that point of self-destruction.
But you see, it's important that we change our perspective of how we deal with this, because people tend to look at the divisive world that we live in and they almost see it like its own tree that's growing, and therefore we got to grow a counter tree and battle that tree. And at the end of the day, that's not it, because we're all a collective. We're all a collective. This is why I like the symbolism of cryptocurrency and the blockchain, right? The decentralization of it, right? That they're all the different nodes are carrying the information, as it were, right? We are all collectively creating the divisive world. The question is, to what degree are you creating that divisive world? To what degree are you perpetuating that divisive world? And that is the only quote unquote battle that can happen. That's the only thing that's going to shift, is what I'm saying. It's not that one group is going to change the mind of another group. It's that you are going to let go. You're going to let go, and everything you do is going to change accordingly. That doesn't mean that you're going to go out there and protest. It doesn't mean you're going to go out there and take down the government. It means that you're not going to need to. Okay, and that's going to change everyone around you in a way that you don't understand. You don't have to understand, because you're letting go and you're having faith in what you are, which is a part of everything. And that's what spreads. And I say this again, after 20 years of doing this journey on my own, and finally coming to a place where this community has grown in leaps and bounds in only a year and a half. Because anybody who's watching, this is a growing conversation. There are almost 14,000 people currently listening to the Dualistic Unity podcast, somewhere amongst the 200 or so episodes. And we have almost 200 people on Patreon that join us from time to time to go into our group discussions, which we do 5 days a week. Discord has almost 1,000 members. There are people who are having this conversation. And so if you're looking for a change, it's you. And you just ran into us, so welcome. We're doing the same thing. Be in the change. It's not about changing anybody else. It's not. It's about letting go of the perception that there is anybody else. So that way you can empathize with people with where they are, rather than needing to change them into something. Because that's what facilitates change. Connecting. Not convincing, not arguing, connecting, having an impact. And the depth of that impact depends on the depth of your presence. That's what changes everything. And so slowly, the color of this collective nightmare starts to change shade by shade, until it can become the dream that has always been possible. But it comes from the divisive mindset that we attach to. And this is why it's so important when looking at this to not think that there's something to battle, that there's some force that you're trying to counter, that the forces of division must be fought. That's just division. It comes down to the same reason that it's difficult to let go of the egos, because you're trying to, right? It's as strong as you are. That's the point. And so you have to let go. If it's worth it, it's worth letting go.
Oh man, because that perspective, and I use this example time to time, and I'm rethinking it now quite a bit with the trees, and like, which tree are you watering? And it's like, it's the same tree. It's the same tree. It's just a shifting in, the flourishing or the death of it. And even that, like, even, and it's just like the product of communication. Like, there has to be some duality in the language, but it's not like those mentalities aren't separate at all. Because as soon as you think that they are, like, as soon as you think it's one versus the other, we gotta ascend, even, is like, you just gotta expand. Like, there's no ascension. It's just like that melting of the ice cube that covers everything. You're not going to get there by staying tense and fucking guiding everything and having any degree of investment in that divisive mentality. Like, and it does happen right now because we're sitting in eternity right now too. There was no process like escalation over time, quote unquote. It's just the degree to which we're doing it right now. That's it. And so that, like, whoosh, fucking brings everything back to this moment. It's like, oh, so that's how things can change really quickly, because there's no other fucking timeline. Like it's that everlasting gong ring. Like, it's just right now, and the degree to which we're investing in it right now. And it's just like the more we're able to let go of that idea of like the expansion of where it came from, where it's going, it's like, I feel like the shift can be insane because there is no other timeline. There's no fucking process. And this is like the opposite of, not the opposite, the other end of the spectrum of what I was just saying with it, but it's not that at all, because it's just this moment and the degree to which I'm investing in that.
Yeah. Why do you think that we keep coming back to this point of it's just about the discussion? Why do you think it's so fucking difficult to think of dualistic unity as a business? Because the actual thing that makes dualistic unity what it is the removal of that need to plan, is the letting go of expectation, letting go of some control as to where this is going. We have to face every day that this lives or dies according to the attention of our listener. And that's where the importance is whether or not, people are taking in anything at all. And that's based on them. It has nothing to do with us. And so all you and I can do is focus on where we are in our life and let it go. Let the audience go. This is why when we're recording, we don't often think of the audience, except that they're me. So as long as I'm paying attention to this, that's good enough. And that's it. Change just keeps happening. But it really is it's an incredible thing to be a part of, because it's so easy to distort. I think that's the point. Like Jacob, or whatever his name was, the other day was coming on and he was like, you guys are ripping people off. You're trying to make money. Like, man, I've spent 20 years of my life trying to figure out how to do this and not make money, or at the very least, how to do this and give people the most incredible value that I can for as little as possible. I just want to get by. I just want to get by, and there's got to be, some way to do that. And we figured it out. We're like, we've got a pretty good thing going here. The ads are starting to work on the podcast, and that is going to continue to fund the rest of this ripple and the people who are involved with it, right? Because those who, I guess, really resonate with the intention behind this are the ones that put in the time, are the ones that are really here for the discussions. But at the end of the day, it's really about getting out of the way and allowing whatever this is to happen. That's a practice. Anybody who thinks it's easy to run this, try and keep that in mind, that this would not be the conversation it is if we were trying to get somewhere. Imagine how tricky that is, right? Because we want to put in the time, but we can't chase a carrot because it would take away from the impact of the conversation. And so it really is. It's more than it appears to be. It really is. But that's why I love it. And that's why at the end of the day, it has an impact on you, listener, because you can see where it's coming from. And if you can't, I encourage you to talk to us in a group. Ask us questions. We'll show you. We're more than happy. But our retreats are very much the same way. We have another one coming up in August. We have 2 coming up in like 9 days, which I'm very excited about. But people are like, well, what are you doing at the retreats? Being with you. That's what we're doing. You're not going to like a Deepak Chopra retreat where, you know, you see him for maybe 20 minutes over 3 days. And then the rest of the time you're going with like meditation people and yoga and all that stuff. And you never had to actually hang one-on-one with Deepak. We're hanging with you. We're being in the moment with you. We're relaxing with you. We are being a part of your life for the time that we can, because that's the best thing we can do. Right? Is just to be there fully with you. So that way you can continue to grow and we're not in your way. And that's it. You know, how many times are just things in conflict with you because there is no sensitivity to what you're doing? We work very hard to be sensitive because we work very hard to get out of the way. And so that's the best thing we can do, is just hang with you and allow you to be yourself. Right. But yeah, as business models go, it's fucked.
Oh God, it really is. Cause it's like, unless when I'm, you know, doing everything that we do, like I'm not thinking about myself, ourselves, like even just the conversations that we have, but it's like, unless I'm thinking about the collective mentality and how all businesses are run, essentially, it's like, oh shit, it is really, really fucking tough. Cause I'm doing my best to let go of those things just in my day-to-day life on these calls, like not thinking about myself, what it means about me. And so it's like, oh, it's such a funny thing. But in regards to attention, God, it's it's so funny how like convoluted it is, even that there's any degree of success, because and that's entirely on you, the listener, like that. Because everything we talk about too, it's not even attention on dualistic unity by any means. It's just attention to reality. It's just paying attention to what is the best thing you could ever possibly do for any iteration of yourself, ourself included. Just paying attention to your fucking life. And through that, if you enjoy listening to the podcast, great. If you want to enjoy the experience of paying attention and you want to talk to a bunch of other people who are doing the same, that's where the groups are. But those are all things that make sense, you know, the community, the experience, when you're paying attention. Like those are the types of things you want to do. Just explore stuff, have in-depth conversations with being able to leave yourself at the door and share things without the fear of judgment or concern. Like the more you're paying attention to reality and not trying to fucking mask it with conceptual ideas, like that's just the stuff that you end up wanting to do. But it's so funny how half-ass backwards it is to like run a business, success metrics being in the egotistical mentality and like being like necessary to a point for it to continue, like absolutely necessary, not where we're making like, you know, millions and millions, but like, you know, at least enough to survive and buy groceries and pay rent. But like, that's the extent. So it's still that balance of like, oh man, it's funny. Like when you really think about, you know, the drives and the draws and like how you just can't do this while trying to have that. Cause you can even have, you know, mountains and mountains of quote unquote success in terms of tons of listeners and reviews and making a bunch of money off whatever. And that's not success in the lens of what we're looking at all. It's actually incredibly detrimental. Like the rich man getting to heaven is like camel walking through the eye of a needle. Like that's it. It's sure, but it's not.
You know, it's funny because for a very long time, I had the idea of residual income for the sake of being able to survive and then just put as much time as I can into the ripple, into just being the ripple, living, talking, communicating, doing this stuff, doing workshops, doing all that. But it was always residual income through, web design and marketing and having a business or something like that. And, it never worked out because it's always so very difficult to get that going. Residual income is actually really quite difficult to keep going without a lot of time. So it was always just about the communication I could do when I was at the jobs that I was in, right? At the end of the day. And now here we are with the podcast. And what I love about it, and this is one of the reasons that season 1 and season 2 really, really convinced me of this. Andrew is just a solid person at the end of the day. Like he really does get all of this, and he understands the capacity that we have to actually make a change. And so we both agreed to cap our income at a very reasonable level. And what I love about that is the possibilities. Because if you look at something like, say, the Joe Rogan podcast, right? Joe Rogan makes a shit ton of money with each and every episode. One episode of Joe Rogan's would be like a year's salary for you and I and some extra change. Okay. So imagine those numbers, and then everything else gets put into the community. Right. And we have a lot of ideas for that. Anybody who's been aware of the Patreon groups and whatnot, or anybody who would like to have a conversation about this on Discord, do, because, there's been a number of people who've been talking about what we can do here. And there's a lot. There's a lot, because we would love to normalize altruism. It would be great to have an agency or an organization that the egotistical world can go, yeah, that's legitimate. And then just fucking flaunt it in their face how little we give a fuck. It's like, oh, you made a lot of money last year and you gave it to a lot of other people to grow farms and shit. It's like, yeah, we did. Or we put it into resources that help communities, or we put it into resources that help people in terms of growing awareness or finding alternative schooling or a bunch of other shit. There's a lot, but it's about having, I don't know, the awareness to honestly know you don't need more, because that's really what we lack in our culture. The ability to go, that's enough. Because really that's what it is. I mean, there was a study in the 80s that showed that there was enough produced for everyone in the world to have one of pretty much everything, right? And we just keep creating more and more shit. We have landfills full of stuff that people bought for a year or two and then got the next model and threw it out, right? And it's wise, because it's never enough. It's never enough. And that's a product of our mentality. It's the reason people need $10 million golden parachutes, for example. It's the reason that people need the fastest cars. It's the reason that we're so goddamn competitive, right? But if you get rid of that, imagine what you could do with just a selfless attitude and a fuck ton of resources.
Yeah, because I see that shit as so much more fun too. Like being able to go around, like put up some fucking billboards. Like part of me wants to like cut into my savings right now and chip in, just because it would be so fucking dope to have a billboard that says, I am you, we are one, you are God. I am you, you are God, we are one, just on repeat for a few months. Like that's fucking awesome. That would be so cool with no branding. People just being like, what the fuck is that? What is that? Like, oh man.
It irritates me. Why won't it go away?
There would probably be protesters. Like they may actually like take it down and just, I don't know, like buy another spot, I guess, after that, if they do. Cause like I could totally see that. I could totally see like protesters with picket signs like protesting the billboard. Like that's something straight out of Idiocracy.
Like, you can't pay for that kind of publicity though,
Oh my God, exactly. Like it would just be straight up an investment in just what is happening. What is this right now? And like, oh my God.
Oh yeah, like little bus ads, for example, like where they're just up there. It's like, the person next to you is your awareness. Shit like that. Like it'd be great. And just because, but that's the point. Like there's a capacity to do a lot of good. And that's something that actually Mr. Beast has been showing lately with and who knows what his intention is behind it, but putting a lot of the money that he's put into just to like the 1,000 blind people, or I think it was 500 deaf people recently. It's like, that's fucking awesome. That is awesome. But imagine being able to get to the point where we have, comparable resources, but instead of making those resources based on entertainment, based on people vying for money, it's based on growth, it's based on awareness, it's based on an actual change within our collective dialogue, an actual interest in letting go of our limitations. That's fantastic, because then we're not selling our souls, right? And then we're not trying to figure out more and more gimmicks to get people involved for the cash, while making it more and more difficult for them to find freedom. And so there's a lot in this, and you'll notice that it's a very narrow path that I am very excited to be a part of. And so before we wrap up here in the next 5 minutes, I just want to say to everyone, and Andrew especially, thank you. After 20 years of my life, this is an absolute dream to be a part of. I couldn't imagine anything better out of my life, honestly. And I'm so grateful to everyone who could join us for this.
Thank you for making it everything that it is. I can't imagine going through that many iterations of like, there's got to be a way to do this in the way it's like, fuck, it's like working a lock and just being just off and like listening to the clicks, and then finally like the last one clicks and it's like, oh, there's something here. Like, this is actually the fact that there's like any steam behind it, let alone like a fuckload of steam, is pretty fucking crazy. Like how against the grain. And that's why we fucking piss everyone off. Like, everyone's mad about something because we're coming at everything that anyone relies upon, because all egotistical mentalities have deep roots. And if it's not, a deep religious root, it's a deep political root. If it's not a deep political root, it's a deep nationalistic root. If it's not a deep nationalistic root, it's a deep gender root. It's all of these things. And that's why we come at everything. And that's why everyone gets mad at us about something if they're attached to some idea of themselves, because there's always something that is overly invested in that is reinforcing that. And so it has to come from a completely different point of view, and like be willing, because we don't cater to anyone. Like we don't cater to any component of the egotistical mentality, because it is coming at that, despite that being the overarching mentality. So from a business perspective, it's like catering to degrees of divisive mentalities is a fantastic idea. And that's how they all make a bunch of money. But like, they all pick on one sort of thing to like boost up, and that's their success. That's their lifeblood. So we're not getting lifeblood from any of those identities like everything else does. Like, oh fuck, it's like a totally different source, being the whole fucking pool of energy.
Fun, eh?
Yeah.
Just letting go and watching potential unfold, as above, so below, individually and collectively. What an incredible time to be alive, though, to see something actually start to take root in a whirlpool that has been dominating us for a very long time. It's cool. So for anybody watching who isn't familiar, check out episode 1, season 1 of the Dualistic Unity podcast, Scratching the Surface. Do check out all of season 1 and season 2, as it is a scaffolded discussion. Basically, it's built slowly over 14 episodes and 21 episodes in season 2. It's a hell of a good discussion. You should definitely check it out. But other than that, you can join us on Patreon, patreon.com/dualistic unity. We do group discussions 5 days a week. And now you can get a free trial as a tier 2 supporter, so that you get a full 7 days. We start on Sunday and we have conversations all the way through till Thursday. If you don't want to join us on Patreon, we also do a free group discussion every Wednesday, 6 p.m. On Twitch. group Zoom. So you can register at the website, dualistiCunity.com. We do a bunch of these too. But if you go to our website, there is actually a group schedule. So if you're wondering when we do these, there's a Google Calendar there, and you can actually import it onto your calendar app. So that way, you know when we're going to be online. Though sometimes we surprise people and just go online, but we usually announce it on Patreon or on our Discord, which you can also join for free. Do check that out. You can check it out through our website in the community tab.
Hell yeah. I'm loving that 7-day free trial for Patreon. That's gonna be awesome. Like, just being able to no cost get a full week, see what it's like, because there's probably a lot of people who listen who have been hesitant. It's like, yeah, it's like now there's nothing holding you back besides just, you know, a couple button clicks basically. So yeah, that's going to be awesome. And yeah, this has been a fun chat. I appreciate everyone who tuned in, and we'll talk to you soon.
Oh yeah. Thanks everyone. We appreciate